two paintings. Look at these two paintings and tell me, what's the difference? What is the difference between these two paintings? And I've chosen a painting that I consider to be far more abstract, far more in the first function, and a painting that's far more in the second function. If we look at these, this first painting is by Mondrian, and the second painting is Botticelli's The Birth of Venus. Yeah. If we look at these paintings, what you see is that Botticelli's painting does more than show you just colors and shapes and lines. There are actual figures in here. There are characters that we see within this piece. There's representation. So I could ask you, who is the central figure in Botticelli's Birth of Venus? And the title tells us, this is Venus. This is Venus being born of the waves, ascending on the half shell of the clam. Yeah. And here on the side, we have spring that is enveloping her in this cloak, and we have the winds blowing on the other side. So immediately we see this is more than just paint. This is more than just paint on canvas, that we're to enjoy the paint and the color and the forms, but here we're to see something different. Our brains put together a different story. We know that this is Venus, the goddess of love, the goddess of beauty, and this is her birth. Yeah. Now, Mondrian's painting is also a beautiful work, but here we're not seeing a representation in the same way. He's probably asking us to appreciate these colors, these shapes, these lines. If I asked you what are the shapes that you see, and you would say that these are rectilinear shapes. These black lines etched between these primary colors of yellow and red and blue, and all of them are iconically and beautifully in these perfect rectilinear, rectangle and square shapes. So there's something beautiful about rectangles and squares and that idea. So this is a celebration of that, but it's a celebration of exactly what is on the canvas. Yeah. We're going to take these apart as we go in this course. Let's start with a quote. Gino Severini, artist. Here's one of his paintings. He said, one of the main causes of our artistic decline lies beyond doubt in the separation of art and science. Art is nothing but humanized science. Now, this is a beautiful quote and a fascinating idea, because so often we think of art and science as so separate. But here is an artist saying, they're both after the same thing, but they're after it in different ways. And our first philosopher, the philosopher in this lecture that we're going to grapple with entirely, FSC Northrop. Well, FSC Northrop, this is what he thought, is that he was interested in finding out how the arts and the sciences functioned, and the logic between these sciences and the humanities. This is Fillmore Stuart Cucko Northrop. All of his books say FSC Northrop. He was born in 1893, he died in 1992, and he was a major contributor to the area of epistemology, which all of you now know means the study of thinking and the study of knowing. This is FSC Northrop's book, The Logic of the Science and the Humanities. On page 82 of this book, Northrop defined two ways of knowing the world. He said that we could know the world through our intuition, or we could know the world through our postulation. Now, in the very simplest way, we can say we can know the world through our intuition, and that is the feeling way we know the world. And by feeling, I mean how we sense it, our senses, how we encounter the world. We can know the world through feeling, or we can know the world through postulation, which is a thinking way of knowing the world. And he said, this is actually the difference, one of the principal differences between the sciences and the humanities. Now, a concept of intuition is a concept that denotes a fact that is immediately apprehended without prior knowledge or reference. And this is a sensed fact, and that is, it is the same for all observers. And Northrop called this a pure fact. Now, you might say, oh, how can something be the same for all observers? But I would say, well, there are some things that many of us do see similarly. If I hold this up, if you don't have a kind of color blindness, most people would say, this is a red book. And that's a kind of knowledge that you sensed and you knew immediately. And that would be very different than some other color that existed for this book. And even I have friends who are colorblind. I even have artist friends who are colorblind, and they grapple with colors, but they still will look at, if they have red color blindness, they'll look at this and they'll know, I don't quite see it the same as other people, but I still discern that this is red. They get to know it from how their eye picks up the wavelengths from this. So I would say that there are some things that we all just kind of know intuitively and immediately. Even things like a cat is soft and furry. The softness of a cat is something that most of us know when something is soft. We just can sense it. And if I gave you money to say, go buy some new bedding, someone might say, oh, I want a blanket, but I want my blanket to feel like it is the softest thing. So you would have this sense of finding that from your senses, from your intuition. Yeah. And Northrop would say pure fact, as opposed to inferred fact. Now, a concept of postulation is where the knowing of the fact is based upon postulates of the deductive theory in which it occurs. A cognitive process formulates, deduces, and determines the fact, and therefore it's an inferred fact. Okay, this is a lot of kind of heady words that I've lifted from Northrop and from page 82 of this book. But what we're looking at here is to know this, that something happened in your head to know something, to know the fact, and you had to formulate it out of what Northrop says a deductive theory on which it occurs. Yeah. Now, he called this an inferred fact. Now, some of this is going to make more sense with some examples. And so I've pulled some examples that we can look at, and these help clear it up. But it's interesting, once you start knowing this, what things do I garner and know of the world through my intuition, through my feelings and senses, and I know immediately and are perhaps the same? And what things do I postulate about? Do I know because of a cognitive process, or do I infer from the knowledge that I can garner from the item, the object, the thing? So for Northrop, art was largely about the pure fact, the intuition, and science was largely about inferred fact, the postulation. Now, this is a classic example from Northrop, and that's the color blue. So let me turn the screen blue. Now, using concepts of intuition, you look at this blue color, and most people know intuitively that it's blue. And it's usually the same for many observers. even regardless of language or even cultural background. When we see blue, we all seem to know somehow that this is blue. And it's sensed and it's determined immediately. Now, that even changes for things like I can shift this towards green, and suddenly you say, oh my gosh, these two colors are different. Now I'm starting to see green, much more green in this one side of than the other. Or if I shift it the other way, I can move it towards violet and purple. Yeah. Now, you might ask, how do I know this by postulation? If some things like this red book, the blue screen, the blue of the sky, if I know those things intuitively and I sense them, what things do I know from postulation? Okay, so to understand the color blue from postulation, you would have to do an experiment. You would have to get out an optical analyzer that measures the wavelength of the light and the reflection of the color. And if the wavelength of this reflection was 450 to 490, then it would be determined as the color blue. And if the color was below 450 nanometers, it would probably be violet. And if it was above 450 nanometers, it would probably be 490 nanometers, it would probably shift towards green. Now, we know that here. This is what science would have in a book if we were looking at the visible spectrum of light. Now, what this is, we are blowing up the part. This is what we can see of light. Yeah. And we know that there are parts of light, there are things that we cannot see. We cannot see AM radio as it travels. We cannot see shortwave or TV or radar or infrared. And on the other side, we can't see ultraviolet or X-rays or gamma rays. Those are things that exist that our eyes don't see it. Otherwise, we could look into our microwaves and we would see the actual waves cooking the food and hitting the food. And that would be probably an amazing sight for us. But what we see is this visible spectrum. And looking at this spectrum, you can see where blue hits at 450. Yeah, between 450 and 500. And then as we go above that, that 500, it shifts to green and then to orange and then into the red spectrum. And if we go the other way, we shift into the purple spectrum. Yeah. Now, someone who's kind of precocious might say, but don't we know the word blue? Didn't we learn that? And I would say yes. There's parts of that it's hard to separate our senses from our brains. Those things ultimately are together. But what Northrop would say is just that pure experience of blue when we encounter it, we know that from our intuition. We garner that information. And then we know things like, oh, that's blue, B-L-U-E. And that's what we call it. And we might even know a history of blue, and be able to give a lecture on blue because of all our postulated knowledge that we know. But the big thing is, what things do we garner from intuition and postulation? Another example. It's August in Las Vegas. Okay, many of you probably were here last summer, and there was no getting away from this because of pandemic. But it's August in Las Vegas. You open the door, you walk out, and you're immediately enveloped by our typical Las Vegas climate in August, and you immediately sense it as what? Immediately, many of you probably thought, oh, August, Las Vegas, it's hot. Yes. And I would say yes. Yeah. You would know that most of the time, things like temperature and that, we tend to know when we feel comfortable, or when we start getting hot and then it's like, oh, I need to take my jacket off because I'm hot right now. So we tend to know from our senses, from our intuition, what temperatures we are in and enveloped in. Now, here's knowing temperature by postulation. You're in your air-conditioned apartment in Las Vegas. You look outside the window and you see a thermometer. And the thermometer on the wall out there says 115. Now, you turn to your friend and you say, wow, it's really hot today. Now, what's interesting about this is you weren't hot. You were in your air-conditioned apartment. But just by looking outside, you postulated from that number, 115, that is hot. So if I was outside, I would be hot. It's hot today in Las Vegas. Yeah. And so you make this kind of very quickly and this postulation pretty quickly because of prior knowledge. Now, when does this fall apart? Sometimes postulations can fall apart. Here's another example. You're now not in Las Vegas, you're in Australia. And you look outside the window and the thermometer outside says 26 degrees Celsius. Now, probably because you are American and you're only used to Fahrenheit of a scale. Now, some of you might have lived in Europe and traveled and understand or have that postulative knowledge. But some of you might say 26, I don't know. Is that hot? Is that cold? And I might ask, what do you do to solve this problem? And some of you might do this. I mean, sometimes someone says, oh, I Google it, or I say, hey, Alexa, and I ask. But someone else might just do the simplest thing by opening the window or walking outside just to see what's it like. Yeah, I always tell the story that my grandmother never believed what the weatherman said on the TV. She always walked out and looked up and did like this and said, I think he's wrong. It's not going to rain today. It's going to be fine. It's going to be warm. It's going to be this. So she always trusted her intuition rather than the postulative ideas that were coming at her. Northrop's final example, and this is, we're now on a hill in Greece, okay? Wonderful. I wish we were there. Yeah, we could just take the class all to Greece. All I can do is show you a picture. So here we are on a hill in Greece, overlooking the ocean. There's lots of beautiful sunshine, and the beach has white powdery sand. And what I would ask, what color is the water? Okay. Now, most people would say, well, the water is going to be a beautiful blue. Now, if you've been to Greece, sometimes I get someone in class that says, I was in Greece. I spent a summer once in Greece, and I think the water is teal. It actually is, it shifts more towards green, and it's a unique color. And I would say that's a unique thing about the world and the light of different places, that the oceans of our world look different because of the light. Yeah. And I would say that the light is different in different parts of the world. And that's one of the things we love about going to Mexico City or going to South America or going to Australia, is suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, the world looks different. The light here is different and the water looks different. So, but let's just accept it's a beautiful blue. Yeah, looking at this picture here. Yeah. Now, I'll ask this question. This is what Northrop would say. Now you go, imagine this. You walk down to the water and you fill up a glass with water. What color is the water? I've now gone and filled up a glass of water from my sink. So we will imagine that this is the water from Greece. And then I'll ask you, if this is the water from the Greek Ocean, what color is it, this water? Now, interesting enough, if you look at this, I'm looking at it on the screen with my light and say, it actually looks, with the Liu Fan behind it, actually, it looks a little bit gray, the water here. And that's interesting, but we probably would say the water is clear. Yeah. And what's fascinating from Northrop is that through our intuition, in one instance, the water at the ocean looked blue, and it was blue. And then here, our intuition tells us this water is now clear. Yeah. So the world has suddenly shifted in how we perceive it. And we weren't upset by it. We just said, yeah. And you could even postulate that there's a reason why water here looks clear, but in a vast amount, as the light hits it, the red part of the light gets scattered off of it, and the parts that come to us are the blue parts. And so the water looks blue. Same with the sky in the middle of the day. Yeah, on a sunny day, the sky looks blue. And those are the reasons. If we have enough water, it's why your swimming pool also, as the size of it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, even sometimes your bathtub with the light, when you have the most amount of water in it, the water will suddenly take on that blue tint because of this. And that you know of scientifically from the postulative parts of how it adapts to that. And some people might say that there's also some reflective qualities, like the leafon behind it can change the water. If my bathroom and my bathtub, if my bathroom was blue, maybe that blue light would also get reflected into the water some too. But in its very essence, we tend to pick these things up through our intuitions.